Simon, we've got a treat today, haven't we? We've got a very interesting guest.
Yeah, I mean, it's great. We've got Anthony Astbury on, the founder of the Wellman Academy. And also he's the overseer of the community within that, the network, and really looking forward to learning more about it. I saw Anthony post on LinkedIn to a guy I've met before called James Pickles, and straight away noticed, that looks interesting. I wonder if he'd be willing to come on and have a chat, because, we're always after inspiring people who are looking at life changes and how they can affect that change in others. And what I liked really about Anthony's one was the male focus, because I think that is important, the work I do around mental health and well-being as well. And I think within the age bracket, across that spectrum, it's something that is always worth having a conversation about. So, Anthony, I just want to say thank you so much for agreeing to come on and talk to us today. And we just want to really get to understand a little bit more about the Whole Man Academy and how you've got to where you've got to, the highs, the lows, the challenges, what inspires you, what gets you out of bed in the morning. So welcome. How are you?
Thanks. Yeah, I'm as a father of 3 kids, I'm slightly sleep deprived, and most parents, whether their kids are grown up and flown the nest or the younger, will understand that brings its own challenges. And now a kind of let's say entrepreneur, business owner of some description. I still can't spell entrepreneur. I always have to spell check it, but I still want to be one. So good. And I'm up in the Cotswolds where it was minus 4 or 5 last night, and
it's cold last night.
Friends of mine that are in personal development and very inspiring characters in the States always admit that life's much easier, whether you like it or not, when the sun's shining, it's warmer, know. Yeah. So apart from that, all good, and looking forward to jumping into some good topics.
Oh
yeah,
great.
Fantastic. So I'll jump off then, because I suppose the question that sprung to me straight away when I saw what you're doing was, what was the motivation to create the Wellman Academy? And I saw on your website your mission. If you could bring that to life for us, that would be great insight for our listeners. So as much depth that you want to go into would be amazing.
I always take it back to I started the Whole Man Academy to help the man that I was when I worked in the city. So I'm 45 now, but I worked in London for various financial institutions, broking houses, trading houses, from when I was 18, basically. So I didn't go to university. I knew I'd probably waste my time there partying, trying to shag girls and mess around all the time, which, was my priorities, but I realized that wasn't my time best spent. And
you might as well get paid doing it.
Yeah, exactly. And I always say, when I started in London when I was like 18, the first role I had was at Glencore, which is one of the biggest, or probably the biggest kind of precious metal trading commodities houses. And I honestly didn't know what they did. I didn't realize how big they were, because I think if I had have done, the 18-year-old would have probably just been like, I'm not going for the interview, I'm too scared, if that makes sense. But ignorance is bliss, and as a youngster you can have that boundless enthusiasm, because if you don't know, you're not worried by it. So I started from 18, spent 4 years there, then I moved on to being a junior power trader for a few years for a company called ABB in Covent Garden. We all got made redundant, which was a really interesting time, because I think I've said on a lot of podcasts, when you talk about, for men and women, when redundancy hits, for some it can be great if you've got a big payoff or you've got another job to go to. But for some, if you haven't, your whole world can flip upside down. Maybe we could talk on that as well at some point.
Yeah.
But anyway, it was around that time that I understood what a broker was as opposed to a trader. And I always say I worked as a junior trader, but I was never interested in it, if that makes sense. Like, I was jealous of some of the guys around me, and it was 95% men, let's just be clear on that as well, who were like really enthused about the numbers and the data and the charts and the figures. And I'd just be like, yes, it's interesting, but it doesn't really get me going, if that makes sense. But the salary did, but not the actual, the numbers.
Yeah.
And what I realized then was that I needed to make that slight transformation between being a trader mindset, and I had people kind of come up to me who were my brokers and say, why don't you come and work for us? You'd be good as a broker. And I said before, the trader was all about the numbers. The broker was about knowing the person behind the numbers, if that makes sense. So I kept, that career for many years, and a lot of it was great. And I'm like all of us here and people listening, watching, whatever, you'll go through phases or a chapter of your life where you might really love something or someone. And then after a while or years or a decade or two, it just lessens your enthusiasm wanes. And that's where I got to at, let's say 36, I'll bring it up to the kind of next chapter of my life. Myself, like a lot of men that I now work with, got to that stage of the old, like, is this it? Is this what I'm going to do for, if I was 36, you might say another 20 years of being in the city, earning good money, let's say like 6-figure salary ish, but not millions. So you're not going to retire at early age. You're going, and the traveling is a success. The more money you earn, the nicer car you have, the ski holidays, the Miami trips, the all those things kind of rise as well. So I got to that stage of, let's say 36, to where I just thought, do you know what? I wanted more out of life. I looked around and saw some men who were business owners or just were living a life of freedom. And I thought, I want that. And doing what I was doing, I was just bored of it. So I didn't hate it. I always say, if you hate your job so much that you think you're going to kill yourself because you're like, I can't handle it, you need to walk out, basically. Self-preservation is number one. But if you just don't like it and you're done with it, you need to, hopefully, if you can, stay in that role until you work out what you're going to do, or at least till you can get a good payoff. So that buys you a buffer. So that took me to 36, where the company were brilliant, who I was with, and they found me several roles. But I had that really imposter syndrome in one of my last roles because I just didn't know what I knew the overall thing of what I was doing. But when you move on to a new market, it's totally new to you. And it's very hard for a person when you've gone from a role where I don't mean you know everything, but you've done it for 8-9 years. So nothing can surprise you. And you're very confident in your ability to suddenly sitting there thinking, I don't know what that means. I don't know who's going to call. I don't know what these financial products are. So it was a very interesting time, but it came to at the age of 36, I basically got into personal development. And I'll throw it back to you with this, that my partner started saying I should listen to podcasts. And I said it so many times, I was like, I'm too busy. I haven't got time to listen to podcasts. And I listened to one or two, and that's the first time I heard the words Tony Robbins and thought, oh, this sounds interesting. And that was the start of my journey onto kind of my own personal development, if that makes sense. So I'll chuck it back to you.
Who switched you on out of interest? What kind of podcast did you get into then? Because obviously the landscape of podcasts then is very much different from what it is now, really.
Yeah, it's a really good question, because I still think podcasting is a very, very valuable, if done well, a very valuable tool to reach people, and it's evergreen content. As long as you're not talking about politics and stuff, which is changing all the clowns in government. But I felt that when there was 2 podcasts I listened to, one was a podcast called Mindset by Design, and fun enough, I don't know if you guys sometimes hold people on a bit of a pedestal because they've got a big following, or you're just impressed with their content. And it was a guy called Andy Murphy, who's from the UK, he's from Liverpool, but he was living out in the US and had a real interesting life. And his big message was, design your own life how you want it to be. And that's a big, big one for most people, because we're not taught that, are we? We're taught, go and get a job, be a good boy, turn up at, when the bell rings and do what you're told. So that podcast, I used to listen to it every morning on the way to on the train on the way to London Bridge. And here's what's cool about that: I ended up connecting with him at a Tony Robbins event, and then we became friends. And now, like, the last London Whole Man Academy dinner, he'd flown over from the States for something else, but was like, I'm coming to your dinner. And it was great, because I used to look at him as up here, and then one day it was like, he's like, I love what you're doing, I'm going to come on your podcast. So I love stuff like that. So that was a big podcast. There was another one, a guy called James Swanwick, who still does a lot of stuff against drinking alcohol. That's his kind of angle now. But he talked about going to a personal development event with Tony Robbins, where he did the fire walk and what have you. And that's the first time I heard the fire walk, and I was like, I want some of this. So that's where it came from.
So have you done, and deviating slightly, have you done the fire walk?
Yeah, did that at Unleash the Power Within at the Excel Centre in the city in London, as in with Emma, my partner. The mistake we made was buying the cheapest ticket we could. You know, they were, it was still like 700 quid for 4 days.
Yeah.
But, you know, we had, when I say lots of money, you know, we had a lot more money than that in the bank, but your brain says, let's go for the cheapest option.
Yeah.
And then you realize you have to queue for hours to get in. So, you know, we're always learning about these things. But I did the firewalk. That was great. A real transformative experience. And I would say for all the people that think about going to events, it's not just about what you learn when you're there. It's about who you meet.
Yeah.
Those people might be someone that you can never discuss or decide how that might, some opportunity might come around. But at one of those events, it was 6-7 years later, I got contacted by someone who had met me at that event and said, I've been looking at your stuff. You know, you've transformed yourself. I'd be interested in you coming and speaking at a panel event and stuff like that. So yeah, if you don't put yourself out there, you know, you're never going to get opportunities.
So in relation to your mission for the Wellman Academy, how did that formulate off the back of listening to these podcasts? How did you then transition? Because obviously you were new to the podcast, still traveling into town to work. And then you've gone, right, I'm going to make the step. I'm going to make the jump and I'm going to formulate this. So what was that process like, just for people to get an understanding of what you went through?
Really scary, really hard.
Yeah.
Because it's like, I never started the Whole Man Academy to become a business. You know, I started it to get guys together to talk. But like all, you learn that doing that isn't enough.
Yeah.
So, and this, you know, will lead on to where we are today. But I mean, it was 2018. Think back how far that was, pre all the stuff that's happened in the last few years. The first event was 2018. We had 25 guys that came along to it. And I honestly wasn't sure if anybody would turn up, because you know what men are like at coming to things. And what you'll know is, of course, I would say men, of course, are very different to women, but often women, when you knowing women that go to events, they'll often take friends with them. Whereas men would often just, I mean, very rarely turn up with their mate. They just turn up on their own. And I know that takes a lot more courage and balls, let's say, to go to something on your own when you've never met anyone. It's not something you've gone to before. Whereas you'd have, you know, the girls' events where they'd be like, oh, I'm taking 3 of my mates with me. And you're like, oh, right. So for me, the first event was like, oh, this is what's possible. The feedback was great. And then really 2019, it kicked off with, I'm trying to think how many events. I kind of lost track, but about 7, 8, maybe 9 events for men, some full day events, some just evening events. And for me, the big thing there was they were all in person. There was no online events at that point. And online has its place, because you and, you know, David, Simon, you both know you can connect with people across the world, but it's not the same as if we were in a podcast studio or whatever. So a lot of the guys loved just getting together, talking in the break, making new connections, having a laugh, talking about any old nonsense that we might come up with. And you'd have professional speakers. For me, I was like, I just want to get guys, it could be like you two, to come on with life experience. And we had special forces guys, former professional footballers, you know, international speakers, just a real mix of guys. And when it got, there's a fly in the room, when it got interesting was at Geeves and Hawkes. If you do or don't know who Geeves and Hawkes is, the Savile Row soothsayer. You know, I think the oldest maybe men's wear brand in the either London or the world or something. And someone contacted me through I love it how these things happen, you know, contacted me through another connection, said, we really like your concept of getting men together. We will sponsor you for a year, but also we'll allow you to use number 1 Savile Row as a event space for a few events, which is massive.
It's very nice. Yeah.
That was real cool, because I wanted, and I think it's for anybody who ever does any event, no matter what it is, you want it to be an experience for the people that come along. But I didn't want it to be an event where guys come along to a crappy hotel room thing where, you know, the carpets are swirly and the chairs are all the same. And I wanted it to be where it's a bit of a cool experience, that you felt comfortable and relaxed. And, you know, it was an aspirational event, not like you're going to some help group or something. And managed to create it with zero expertise, but just using a bit of imagination and stuff. But anyway, 2019, you can sense there was really good momentum. I'd started writing the Whole Man Journal, which we're now up to 510 articles I've written for that. and obviously 2020 it all went to shit, to use a technical term.
Yeah.
And it was really hard financially as well, but also even for getting the money, because money you can find money anywhere, but you can't create momentum like that. So I'll pass it back to you to see what questions you've got from what I just said.
I was going to say, as you said, this challenge, if we call it that, with COVID, I suppose at that point you'd had such a positive experience of face-to-face events. So the like you say, things went to shit, and things got bad. But I remember, it's interesting you mentioned Jeeves and Hawkes. It didn't get quite as bad as things got for them, I suppose. Like the shirt business literally nosedive, and I think they're now owned by Mike Ashley, I think, actually. But going back to kind of what you were saying, what was your initial kind of thought that first week? I suppose from memory, like COVID did kind of creep up a bit, didn't it? It was like, there's definitely something going to happen, and there was all the news from Italy and things like that. But that first week when things did shut down completely, I suppose, what was your thought at that point?
It's a really good question, because I found I was within a few weeks, I was quite outspoken about lockdowns, because I could see the result of what it was going to do. And unless you're stupid, you now look and you see the NHS waiting list has exploded. Children, were being taught by people wearing masks. Now, whether you agreed with masks or not, it's going to have a psychological difference for brain development and talking and etc. You had people in care homes that weren't allowed to see their family, and so all of that, plus all the money printing. I mean, I loved it when I spoke to someone a while ago at one of our kind of little village church events, and this was 6 months ago, when the pension funds were being bailed out, and they were bailed out for billions, or and they said all we need to do is just keep printing more money and it will sort it all out. And I said, no, you can't just keep printing money. That's all it's going to do is drive inflation. And you look now at where everything is, plus the interest rates. So all of that, I'm not saying that all of it's just been caused by lockdowns, but if you pay millions of people millions or billions of pounds to not work, it's going to have an effect. But rabbit holes of that aside, it was one of those where the first few weeks none of us knew what was going on, and then I just realized, like all of us, you can either basically sit in your garage, hold your knees and rock backs and forwards and moan about it, or you can get on with it. So there's old saying, adapt or die. So I'd always wanted to, or say always, not since I was a kid, but wanted to have my own podcast, and I'd understood the power of it, of also attracting your, let's say, a brotherhood, or attracting, let's call it customers for argument's sake, because you can write beautifully crafted things, especially these days with AI, and you can edit and do it, but when you're on a live thing for an hour, you're either you or you're acting, and it's very tiring if you're acting. So I realized the best thing to do was, like, do you know what, start putting content out there, and I'm very much about polarization is key. The quicker you can make someone decide if they're looking for transformation, the quicker you can make them decide if they think you're great or you're crap, you're doing them a favor. Because if they think you're great, they'll hopefully listen to your stuff, take action, have some impact in their life, and buy your products and be part of your kind of movement. If they don't like you, the quicker you can get rid of them and allow them to go and find who resonate, then you've done them a favor. Is a good way of looking at not being vanilla with all your content, if that makes sense.
No, I think that's quite a powerful thing, because I was just writing down, when you put down 510 articles, that's a lot of content. What inspires your content creation? So how do you formulate that? Because obviously to freshen it up and keep finding things that are going to be engaging, do you have a process for that, or how does that work for you?
It's a good question. To start with, no. And the good thing was, probably, like, I'm guessing you guys might have a few personal development books. So I used to sit with my bookshelf, and if I lacked inspiration, I could literally close my eyes and just go and pick a book out, and you'd be like, right, there's something. I'd say I'm a researcher of great men as well. So I would not just share my views, because I'm not, I would consider myself I hate the term expert necessarily, but after 5 or 6 years of this, I'm a lot further ahead than a lot of people. I've coached lots of men. I've hosted God knows how many events. I've done 130 podcasts. We have our online quiz, so I get feedback of what's really going on with men. I've created an energy protocol course. I've done corporate talks for all these guys. So I've rolled that together. I've got a lot of kind of mild expertise, if that makes sense. But I always try to make it that, you'd be like, right, what are the most common things that men are struggling with that you could help them with? And the more men you spoke to, the more little things you found. A lot of it came back to confidence, financial things, sleep and energy when you're a dad or you're an entrepreneur. Men maybe in their 50s who are then looking at their careers or their business and thinking, I'm either nowhere near I wanted to be, or I've done so well that no one understands what it's like and I need a new challenge. So back then I didn't have a system. These days I have like a digital, not in my notepad, but I have a thing which literally has every idea that I think of just goes on there. And also it's seasonal, because this time of year you might talk about, to state the obvious, coming up to Christmas, some people have stress of trying to buy Christmas presents. Some people have it where their parents are ill or they've died and they're not going to see them at Christmas. There's all these different silent struggles for men. But yeah, on average, my journals are, let's say on average, just under 1,000 words. So you could say that I'm probably about 500,000 words I've written on men's health. So I've done my bit.
Yeah,
that's a lot of content. Yeah. I suppose when you first started that at the beginning of COVID, did you obviously those first few bits of content you created, did you ever envisage it would get to the scale it has?
What, the COVID stuff or the actual?
The number, like you said, you've created probably over almost 500,000 words. Like, did you ever think you would have that many articles?
Probably not. And it's one of those, I guess it's like anything, is it? If you think too far ahead, you might overwhelm yourself. And do you know what, you guys are with podcasts? So I did I would suggest for anybody that's listening that thinks, I might want to start a podcast, firstly, do it. Firstly, do it now. Don't say, I'll wait till whenever, because wait 3 months. You could have had 5 episodes and you'd have learned so much from episode 1. What I did was I always go, if you want to learn something, go to people that are doing better than you, if you can afford it. There's a lot of free content. So I paid $2,500 for a podcast course with the guy Brian Rose, who hosts London Real, if you know what podcast that is.
And listen,
he's trod a similar path to me, prior to me, but he worked on Wall Street, worked in London in the city for ICAP, which is one of my competitors. So he's a good one to be like, he shows what's possible. But basically I realized I loved his content and the way he did things, and he would bring on people that had totally different opinions to others. But I think that's important, because sometimes I've learned more from listening to people I disagree with than listening to everybody that just says what I think. So I learned a lot. But what he did, and we'll come on to this as well, the importance for people is gave you clarity, focus, and accountability. Because when it's just you're like, I'm going to do a podcast. What should I call it? When should I do it? What should I do it on? How long should it be? Do I need a logo? All that stuff. His thing was, here's like a 12 or 8 week, whatever it is, kind of framework to get you started. And I want a report every week on Zoom of what you have done, what you haven't done. And it forced me, I love that. I think a lot of men like to be, when I say told what to do, just given a framework to work towards.
Deadlines and things like that.
Deadlines, It gives you something instead of, it's like when you go on holiday, isn't it? You can get a lot done when you know you're going on holiday, because you'll stay up late and get it done. So when we launched, his thing was launch now. Everybody will go, oh no, because I can't, it's not. And he's like, no, fuck that. Listen, we're launching now. And his big thing was people come up to him and say, I've got a podcast. And you go, oh, great, that's fantastic. How many episodes have you done? And they'll go, oh, like 3 or 5 episodes. And he's like, you haven't got a podcast. Come back to me when you've got at least 25, 50, 100. And I've said before, I remember when I recorded episode 100, that I was like, that's
job done.
That's job done. So,
I think that links to what you were saying there, because, obviously me and Dave jumped in it. We started off with an AI podcast, didn't we, Dave? Because we were quite interested in that world. And then we got a bit bored of it
Jaded
because
by it,
it is just a lot of people spouting bullshit about their AI product, and it wasn't really, resonating with us because you thought it's just people selling and none of the products are that good just yet. But that imposter syndrome bit where you think, we did just say, let's just do it. Fuck it. What's the worst that can happen? We'll make mistakes. It's not the end of the world. And as you go through it, you refine it. So how do you approach imposter syndrome? Because you touched on that earlier, going into that different role within the city. Is that something that you still face? And how do you overcome that type of stuff? Is there strategies that you found useful?
I like to keep things simple. Building confidence is doing things you find difficult often, and even if they're little, as often as possible, and the more and more. And even now, let's say with corporate events, and I've spoken at Spotify, Daily Mail, Credit Suisse, Barclays Bank, Lloyds Bank, Daily Mail, Domestic in general, all these different companies, but you still sometimes think you have the butterflies in your stomach. But I like to remind myself of, do you know what I've done? Let's just picking up like 50 corporate talks, and I've never had a bad a bad comment, apart from one guy who said, it was a, you got to laugh. I love feedback, and I love it sometimes when it's ridiculous, because people sounds harsh, but some people are stupid. And my talk at that point was about morning routine and how important it was, like breath work, movement, drinking something healthy, and planning your day. And he said something like, it's useful at best and dangerous at worst because it wasn't scientific. And I was like,
Where was that? Where was that? Who were you speaking to?
I'm trying to think which company it was. I've done so many, and some that you kind of forget, but I just remember that being funny, because on that same thing, it reminds everybody. I got like 3 or 4 messages set up after on LinkedIn from a man or a woman saying, "Hey, thanks very much. That little thing then is something I even a reminder for me to implement." And then I got the message saying, it wasn't, you didn't share the science behind it. And I was like, what, getting up early, being healthy, focusing, but you can't please all the people all the time.
No. But it goes back to those number crunches you mentioned in the city, getting turned on by the digits. Some people's mindset and the way they see the world, you go, that's so alien towards the way I see the world. Science is good. We know data's good, but also it's dull and it doesn't always stack up. We know that the science can be nonsense. So when people say, well, this paper says that, but there's 2 papers over there that say the bloody opposite. So,
and who funds the paper?
Who funds the paper? Exactly. What's their narrative? Oh, it just so happens they have a health and well-being business. That
they're on the board company or something like that.
Yes, exactly.
So, and like you say, you're always going to have dissenters, and people aren't really going to resonate with you. But do they really count? It's nice to get feedback because it gives you perspective. But ultimately, are they going to be someone that wants to be part of where you're going and what they're involved in? I doubt it. I doubt it very much.
Simon,
go on.
Back to the 1,000 True Fans concept, if you've heard of that before. And that for me, I found it that helpful, and I've talked to some people that are they're trying to build some kind of audience, and I say it takes the pressure off you a bit, because for me, I'm not interested in, I know people with millions of followers, and don't get me wrong, it's useful, but it can be a real pain in the ass as well. And for the 1,000 True Fans, for me, it's like, do you know what? Let's say today's email I sent out, within half an hour, like 240 men have opened the email now, because we've got like a high open rate of like 53%, which I never understood, but people were like, oh, that's really good. I was like, is it? Good, for me, it's like, no, it's not. Why isn't everyone opening my emails? It's the nature of the beast. But I realized that instead of me trying to have, 100,000 people on my email list and 1 million followers, actually, I could kind of tell you all the people, especially in our membership we've got, people assume that, you must want, people are very much, what's the numbers and how much are you going to make from it? And I was like, no, because if you have a shitload of people coming on, you have no idea who these people are. Whereas for us, we launched it 2.5 months ago. It closed midnight last night, and we got, including me, 19 men in there. So I know every single one of them. Have they got kids? What their silent struggles are, where they live, probably how much they earn. I know what they need to be working on now, and I can continue with all that. Whereas if you had 50 men join, I'm like, I haven't got the time. You'd have to get more people. So it's not always numbers. I mean, to an extent, if your mortgage has got to be paid, but sometimes it's like, I rather a slow burn and the more personable approach than just let's see get as many people in as we can.
What do you think will be I suppose, a workable like maximum of people in the group? Do you think?
That's really I got asked this question just this lunchtime because I've realized that the more you get around people that are where you want to be or are moving in the same direction, the better, and it's not to say you shouldn't speak to old friends and stuff like that. And some men and women are quite happy, and that's great, to do their job, their 9 to 5 job, for argument's sake, come home, have dinner, watch the telly, which is all rubbish anyway, but look at the news, believe the news is real, and that's it, and just get to the weekend. And I'm like, great, we kind of need those people as well to do that stuff. But also for me, I'm like, I want to be around men that are driven to succeed, and not necessarily monetarily. For some, it's like they've got quite a lot of money, but they want more freedom. Because we've said about the trappings of success. Some people, like, when I say the trappings of success are those things that trap you in to thinking you're successful, like the big house, the kids at private school, the expensive car, the watch, all this stuff. All great. But example, in the city, I saw men who hated, and I mean hated their job in the end, who slept in separate beds to their wife because they were, disjointed marriage, but stayed together for the kids. But on the outside, you'd say, look, this guy earns, let's just say, $100,000 a year. He's got 2 nice, a BMW and a whatever. He, has got 2 lovely kids, a big house in a affluent area. Life's good. And then you speak to him, and he's like, I fucking hate my life. I'm completely lost. Yeah. And you go, but you've got loads of money.
Yeah.
And guys, it's not, money's very helpful, and it's very useful, and it gives you some opportunities if it's used in the right way. But it's no surprise to say it's not the be all and end all.
Because I quite like the Japanese sort of philosophy of ikigai. I haven't gone into any depth in it, but I've always liked the summary, which I quote quite a lot, is do something you enjoy that helps others, that earns you money. For me, I always see that as the basis of things, because if you've got those 3 things in your life, then you're going to feel that more success. And then how does it then branch out into your wider life to go, right, okay, well, what does this look like for my personal thing? Because it almost links to Stephen R. Covey's sort of, habits of highly effective people, doesn't it? Around, what do effective people do? Because you can say you fall into the trap of wealth is the goal. But I'm just reading that book, and me and David touched on it, by Robert Kiyosaki, around Rich Dad, Poor Dad, where you go, the middle class are getting squeezed even more and more and more. And they're in that rat race.
Very fine way of putting it.
And it's pressure. There's a lot of pressure on them, because instead of the tax being paid by others, because they have greater tax accountants and know how to use the system, people getting taxed at source obviously feel that pressure, and then have to chase additional income to try and maintain that outward, success. And I think that probably ties into some of the things about the Wellman Academy. How do you help those guys who think, I feel squeezed, I feel pressured, this isn't fulfilling for me? Because I've written down here about your quiz, and how did you formulate that quiz and the questions to then give you the data you're looking for? And how do you then use that data to help that person who submitted that form? What's that look like for you?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's something I would say I wish I'd have done years ago. It's like all of us. If you'd have, if you had your time again, you'd do certain things differently, or other things you wouldn't do at all. But the one thing I struggled with was like lead generation, like lead capture, because just asking for someone to sign up for a journal or a Wellman Academy e-letter, it's the guys that are on it enjoyed it and get valuable content from it. But for a lot of people, like we all know, we're bombarded with requests for our email address. And then I don't know, do you know who a guy called Daniel Priestley is?
I've heard of him. Yeah.
So he's the CEO of Dent Global, which takes companies and kind of helps them magnify their ability, if that makes sense. And I had him on the podcast, and I was genuinely nervous that he was the first guy that when I heard he was accepted, I was like, yes. And I was like, shit, like, what if I make a cock of myself? Because I'd always been an employee. And when you're going to talk to someone that's and I called it an entrepreneurial mastermind, you know, the little boy inside's like, please don't say something stupid. So, because I respect him and I wanted him to like me and not think I was asking stupid questions. So, but long story short, he is one of the founders of something called Score app. And I would suggest, you guys might know, but for anybody in business, it's a very, very good and very cost-effective tool. So for me, what I realized is we all love, how can I put it, analyzing ourselves and quizzes and stuff like that. So the big thing was, how can we create a quiz that basically breaks down the 10 major sectors of a man's life? So let's just say relationships, finance, health, fitness, your career, network, a few different ones. But ultimately, you also realize people are time poor. So you can't ask them to fill in some 100 question quiz because your completion rate will be shite. So it was, listen, give me 1 minute. It usually, on average, it actually takes people about 2 minutes and 3 seconds. But anyway, give me 1 minute to answer these multiple choice questions, which will basically be, how are you financially? Is it you're comfortably well off, you're loaded, you're completely broke, or you're okay but could do with more? And those 10 questions, which again, it's like read it, press. In 1 minute, what would it then do was organically create 3 bits of, and this is why it's important, it's not just some generic, everybody gets the same answers. If Simon, you said financially I'm great, but physically I'm less than great, and David said, well, actually I'm completely opposite, depending on how you scored, like low, medium or high, you'll get 3 bits of advice completely based around your low, medium, high. So if you're like, do you know what, I've got loads of money already, it will say, okay, well, here's some high level advice on what else you could do. If you're broke, it'll be like, first thing to do is work out how much money's coming in and out. So all 10 questions give completely organic, individual advice. And to answer your question of how I got the answers, my 130 podcasts, I took a lot of the advice that I got from special forces guys, CEOs, crypto experts, all these different, strength and conditioning experts, footballers. And some of that I plugged into it, and the other stuff I researched it myself. It's like, what's the simple actionable advice to help a man read it and go, shit, that's a good idea. And what that gives is, in the last 3 months, had like 70 men go through it, which for some people be like, that's not a lot. But if you stood those men together and said, here's 70 men that have taken the time to answer, and the last question, which doesn't go against a score, but the last question is, what's going on for you right now? And be completely honest, because I don't care what you say, like, I want to know. And some of the answers are mind-blowing, because men will say, I've never told or no one else knows this because I don't want to tell my wife that I'm financially in trouble. My family wouldn't want to know. My colleagues will probably be glad I'm doing bad. Just all these different things that for a lot of men, that's their silent struggle.
Yeah, and I completed it today, actually. I wanted to try it out. Yeah, I wanted to see it, and I got my results through. And, I've then just, because I've been working all day, like we probably all have, I've now just got to revisit them and have a look at that, because I always find those diagnostic tools quite useful, just to see what aligns with what I already knew about myself, but what actually could be slightly different, or a blind spot for me where I thought, oh, yeah, I haven't really considered that before. Especially with my health condition, like I mentioned to you recently, I've had colitis, and just how that saps your energy. And you have to start thinking of more innovative ways to try and live to earn money, because that grind, you couldn't do the grind, when you're unwell. And I think that stimulus, for me, that's why I'm seeking out lots of different types of opportunities that you discuss, because it just makes sense to go, well, there's other ways to achieve things, and I need to broaden my bandwidth about, well, what does that look like? Why am I a bit naive to the world around certain things and how you can generate things? And I think this that's another great thing. So
my partner, I'm just making sure my out of office is on. My partner Emma is a naturopathic nutritionist, so she works through the Whole Man Academy with men, let's say, who've got health issues, weight issues, etc., etc. And I think one of the big takeaways for me from my learnings from all the in-depth stuff that she's learned is that, you know, there's so many natural remedies for things, but of course you can't package them up and charge people lots of money for them. So big pharma doesn't like those, and they actively ban groups who, I mean, I'm not joking when we've seen it where you'd have like Facebook groups of natural health practitioners who would, you know, be sharing really good stuff, and there might be thousands on there, and Facebook deletes the whole group.
Massively.
Simon, Anthony, we've just some, I suppose, background information that probably our listeners don't know about and things like that as well.
It gets good.
We have had numerous issues with Spotify censoring our content. So we are in the process. Well, we're going to move everything over to Acast this weekend. And I think this episode, I think we've got no chance in terms of the topics we've talked about.
Well,
that's a good thing. I'm not moaning. That's a very good thing.
What are the topics? So this is I think this is really important. I was on an hour and a half webinar last night with men. It was all about men's masculinity. To be honest, I get bored of talking about what is masculinity because, to be honest, I've got more important things to talk about. I'm like, I couldn't give a fuck what you think masculinity is, or you don't. I just want to help you move forward in life. Like, we can sit there and piss. I
don't think you're ever going to win that argument. Yeah,
that's it. And you know, everybody's got a different version of what it is. So I'm like, great, just shut up and get on with it. Let's move on, moving forward. But I'm very interested in what the topics are. So we don't have to necessarily go down the rabbit hole of the topics, but what are the topics that you would say are the most flame-grilled ones at the moment?
Well, but it was COVID, Dave, wasn't it? We had one with suicide that we didn't give a pre-warning that we were talking to someone who was suicidal. And then also, what's the one you just mentioned? Big Pharma would probably be the next one.
I imagine that's ringing a bell,
You know, they would start to go, well, we can't have people expressing an opinion about that, even though, you know, the medications that I'm on, I would love to get away from having to take pharmaceuticals because I just think it's to make me a good pill taker, and I don't think it's about making me well. That's my opinion.
You're a customer.
Yeah, that's it, and keep him coming back for more. And I don't want that. So natural remedies. You know, I'm starting to reach out to someone in my local area who might be able to guide me with lifestyle and diet as well. And that's the route I am going down, because you think, well, actually, you look at the value that they could offer your life. Yes, it's probably pricey, but as you said, do you want the cheap seats where you've got to queue for ages, or do you want your health to be fast-tracked to a good place? And sometimes investing in that. And I think people, I remember speaking to a life coach once. He said, look, would you buy yourself a brand new car for 10 grand? And the guy he was talking to said, yeah. And he said, well, why wouldn't you invest that time in yourself? Why wouldn't you spend that money on you? You know, and I think that's vital. So, sorry, Dave, to cut across you there. So what were you going to chip in?
No, I was just saying it's, I think the other part, and just take it another notch up in terms of conspiracy stuff.
Keep going, Dave. Keep going.
The big element that was killing us was they obviously use like some sort of AI or automated like pattern stuff. So when we first kind of got, I suppose, not suspended, but just kind of in a holding pattern, if we call it that, was around COVID. And actually the episodes that kind of were flagged, we actually, I think it was literally the word COVID was mentioned. There was no like kind of anything. Yeah, there was literally nothing. And then that was it. It was just kind of like, well, what have we said? And then it was weird.
I think it's really important to talk about this because a lot of people don't realize how much stuff has been and still is, but has been censored. And I've said before, and I was on a podcast a few weeks ago where at the end, the chap said to me, it's really refreshing to have someone that will come and talk openly and honestly. Yeah. Because a lot of people will be like, oh, I just don't want to talk about it. And I'm like, no. The stuff you don't want to talk about is the stuff people need to hear and want to hear. Yeah. So I saw it the same. You know, I had friends and you know, that if you just had an alternative view, which now has been shown to be completely correct, if that makes sense, but you got censored, shadow banned, deleted, deplatformed, PayPal took away your, you know, PayPal deleted people's accounts, all of that happened. So, and some people, if they didn't understand, would be like, what? I didn't know. And you'd be like, well, just be clear that I'm an adult. Last time I checked, I don't always act like one. But so for me, I want you to show me, no matter what topic we're talking about, show me everything, and I'll make up my own mind about what I wear, what I listen to, what things you might allow in or near your body. And then I'll make my decision. Don't say, we're going to keep you safe. We'll delete anybody that says something anti, what the narrative is. So it's a most divisive topic. And the other big one is, if you talk about transgender issues, that gets flagged up. I could go down all these rabbit holes, and also for schooling as well. So the shit that kids are being taught at school is, and I'll say this is a technical term, it's fucking outrageous what they are being taught at school, especially sex education. They're like disgusting what they're trying to force onto teenagers. And I know this firsthand, and it's shocking. And when you go down the rabbit hole of where let's call it the content, the syllabus comes from, it's not a nice place to go.
And there's a lot of this happening in America, isn't there, around transgenderism, pushing this agenda, the content in schools, like you say, about how they could even perform fellatio on someone at a young age, and how it's almost encouraged, and then be the blockers, the puberty blockers. And, I've heard horrible things about Canada, where actually they would say the children should make their own choice, and they could be 10, 11, 12. And you think, well, how have they even formulated that sort of concept? We wouldn't let them vote, but we'd let them make a decision on that. And sometimes these people who are starting to consider transgender, they may have additional things going on with them as well, where they need guidance and support even more than someone else. And like you say, you go down that rabbit hole, and that's where the conspiracy theorist stuff and people start to throw it at you. But you think there's got to be no smoke without fire. There is things there, so they try to cover it up.
For the kids actively being encouraged. I think for most people, when you talk to them, and I speak to a lot of men, most of us, let's just say men, couldn't give a fuck what someone wants to be known as, right? It's but don't try and push it on other people. And my thing is, you can't normalize it. It isn't normal. It's a very, very, very small minority. So again, you do you, but when you realize that it is being filtered through to children, and you saw all the issues with drag shows and mental parents taking their children to drag shows and thinking it was, I don't even know where to start, cool and edgy. These people need help, to be honest. And if they don't need help, they need their hard drive checking. So it's a very, very interesting time. And I literally was talking about this morning with some schools which I know that are pushing just horrendous content on the kids. And a lot of parents, the problem is they either don't realize they're being taught it, or they can't be asked to go and say, what the fuck are you teaching my kids? So it's a very interesting time to be alive.
Yeah, because I picked up on earlier that you said that you're homeschooling your children, and is that part of the rationale behind why you do that? You're going, I want to be the one who oversees what my child is exposed to, and I'm looking at this and going, well, actually, if you've spoken to all these really great people around the world, actually the learnings from them and what children would benefit from would probably be far greater, than what they're getting taught in school. Going back to Robert Kiyosaki, he goes, look, school's great, it gives you stuff, but does it prepare you for the world? And I think, I wrote down here, what do children need? How does the whole man concept maybe fulfill some of that about, well, our children probably need an exposure to alternatives to help that critical thinking to go, let me just not digest what I'm being told. Let me analyze that. And what are the skills I need? How do I become financially savvy? That's going to help me for the world. And, what does that look like? So have you give that much thought? Because I thought that was quite interesting when you mentioned that.
Yeah, I mean, do you know what? And just to go back to your point, which is a really good one, what do children need? Well, firstly, a strong father. and mother and kids. I always say look up to mummy first, because mummy, in theory, they come out of her, and the first thing they need is mummy's skin touch and her kisses and her milk and her love and everything else. But next up is dad, and if they've got a pathetic father or no father at all. I interviewed I always get his title wrong. It might be a psychotherapist called James Hawes, who talks about the wound of the father, and he said something like 95% of all the men that he works with, nearly 95% of those, it goes back to some issue with either the dad was there but was fucking useless, or he wasn't there and they had a complete void. And male and female energy, mums can do their best and do incredible work, but mummy can't have the male energy. It's just impossible. And we can be as calm and what have you, but we haven't got the nurturing energy maybe that the feminine side has. And most kids need a bit of both. And if you grew up without a dad, I've said all of, if not nearly all of my mates that grew up with, I would say anger issues, the ones that were always fighting, always. If you said, can you guess who ended up fighting in Maidstone Town Centre tonight or whatever, you'd go, this person, this person, this person. Yeah. And it wasn't a one-off. And you notice all of them either had a dad who wasn't around or a dad who was crap, basically. So you said, what do kids need? Firstly, awake parents who understand how the world works, how Big Pharma works, how the food works, how people make a lot of money out of war, and that's that industrial complex is a big money making mincemeat machine. So the other issue with kids is it's allowing them to grow and not fit into a box of, right, today you're going to learn 1 hour of this, 1 hour of this, 1 hour of this, and then the bell rings and you go. For our kids and the masses of home educated kids we know, sometimes they'll be completely lost in something for ages. And to say halfway through, right, stop, let's go. And they'll be like, no, I'm creating something. The other thing is, commonly, you can tell I could talk a lot about this stuff as well, but for the home ed stuff, a common one for a lot of people will be, firstly, well, how will they learn to socialize? And you say,
I was going to say that was a question that was coming in my head.
So
I suppose that's the.
Let's say a 6-year-old child, and he goes to school. Who did you spend all day with?
One or two mates that he likes the most, I imagine.
And they're all what? 6 years old.
Yeah.
And are they learning from each other? Not really, because they're all the same, if that makes sense. Whereas when they're homeschool, you'll have like our little newborn baby. The older kids are learning to nurture the baby. And our 4-year-old, they're learning how 4-year-olds work. The 4-year-olds are learning how 12-year-olds work. And they all end up intercombining and learning from each other, if that makes sense. Also, you're not constrained by, today we drove 45 minutes to go to something with all these kids from all different areas. Whereas generally, kids are in school just doing the same thing. And let's be honest, kids at school was created to create worker bees. Going back to the war, the Ministry of Education, it was not there to create enlightened individuals. It was to create worker bees who can either work with their hands or work with their brain behind a computer. And you go to school to learn to get there at 9 o'clock. When the bell rings, you sit down, shut up, you do what you're told, and you all wear the same thing. So you're all in uniform. And you can, when you go home, you can go home and do a bit more homework, which is just ridiculous as well. So the big thing for me is I appreciate it's really hard. It's really rewarding. It's very hard in homeschooling, depending on your situation. But I would do anything to make sure that we homeschool our kids. So none of that decision started with the shit that goes on with what they're being taught at the moment. But that is like a nail in the coffin for what is going on. And a lot of parents, and I know them, like will say, listen, I wouldn't know where to start with homeschooling because I don't know how it works. And it was the same for us. But once you understand, it's really, really important. And there's several of the most switched on people, happen to be men that I know in the world. One of their messages is, if you can, don't send your kids to school.
Yeah.
I suppose one question I have around it is, and I have a friend that she has homeschooled her kids, but it got to a stage where she actually put her kids into school. And that stage was kind of as you get towards like your GCSE type things, where you have to, I suppose where she hit limits was there's the amount of hoops she had to jump through. It just became unmanageable. because you know, like having to deal with like exams and the exam boards and stuff. Is there a point, I suppose, where would you put your children into school at any point, or do you think
never, if I could help it? But do you know what? It's a really good point, that, because what are exams? Are they a true
test? Most of the time for me, I find.
Are they a true test of someone's ability, or are they who can memorize as much stuff as possible and then regurgitate it on a bit of paper?
Yeah.
So and don't get me wrong, you know, I went through the whole school system, and most people I know did, but I didn't know then what I know now. So it's not to say for us that we wouldn't ever put our kids in, but for us it's about imagine every day saying to a child, what do you want to learn? What are you interested in today? One of them is totally interested in one thing, and one of them will spend hours on like woodwork, and that's how he'll learn his numbers, not by sitting from a chalkboard, but being like, right, where's my ruler? I'm counting, I'm working on stuff. One thing I will say, just the same as COVID, the trans something, it triggers some people. I have to be careful, because don't get me wrong, it is hard, and for some parents they couldn't homeschool because you've got to go and earn money. And you could almost say that the economy has been deliberately destroyed. You know, from a child could look at what's the way the economy is now and the way it's been created and run, and be like, well, I thought the experts were supposed to be in control. But you could say there's multiple things. One is, you know, small business owners and middle class people are being completely screwed. And what does that create? The dependency on the government, which is why universal basic income was piloted as a scheme in Wales, because you say, look, don't work anymore. We'll just pay you a small amount of money, but of course you've got to do whatever we say.
And if they bring in the central digitized banking, crypto stuff, you know, there's lots of theories around that and how they can turn it off and on if that does go down the route. And it's starting to look like those things are slipping into place through the Vanguards, the BlackRocks, and these other big organizations. And I think going back to education, you know, my background is a football coach educator. I used to work for the FA. You know, it's one of the things that I'm really interested in. I always found that there is an innate element in people, an intrinsic motivation for things that they're interested in. You learn what you're interested in, and you get good at what you're interested in. It's not, I've got this plethora of stuff, you know, Hastings 1066, blah, 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 nonsense that you don't really need. It is more a case of, isn't it? When I work in this role, I get good at it because I'm doing it every day. I learn how to refine it, shape it, and move forward. And I think that's the big thing I'm trying to do with my own child, my son, is to say, well, look, this is why we started the podcast, the AI one, wasn't it? Around, we want to learn a little bit about this because that's the future. That's not going to go away, but they ain't going to get taught that in school. So how do we become a bit savvy to try and have conversations with our children in and around it? And then learning more about, well, you need to learn how to earn money, mate. If you learn how to earn money, then you've got security. You'll be confident about how to do that, which gives you that freedom that you've touched on earlier about, well, actually, when I've got freedom, I can dictate what my life looks like and how I go forward with that.
It's so important.
Yeah, it's hugely important. And I suppose, I know at the moment you're focused more on the men element. Would you ever dip down to support children or parents with things, or does that already happen as part of the Wellman Academy with the conversations that you have?
It's a good question, because the way I see it, if I can, I mean, not all the men that I deal with are dads, but, you know, a fair percentage of them. But then again, a lot of those men, even if they're not dads, they might have nephews, nieces, etc., etc. But for me, it's like, and you were talking about it there, for a lot of the guys that are in the Wellman Academy, they want to earn more money because they can also see that with AI, jobs will be taken. You know, it doesn't take a brain surgeon to look now and be like, there's certain jobs that either won't necessarily disappear, but will certainly, you know, less need. For example, copywriters. I know someone who worked for a company where they had, let's say, 5 copywriters. Now they just have 1 because that person can use AI and do the work of 5 people. So for me, it's about helping a man find the drive, which isn't always easy to do, the drive to go and work on whatever he wants, whether it be a health issue or a financial issue or his relationship. But the financial one comes up a lot because who doesn't want more money? And you've seen in the last 3 years, we had friends who worked for companies. I'd have been a disaster if I'd have worked for a company, because with what happened in the 3 years, being told what you should or shouldn't do would have been an interesting conversation. But what they found was, you might be happy in your job, but when all the issues started happening about whether you wear masks and all that stuff, and they were like, well, I'm not, and the company then try and squeeze you and make it hard for you, you think, hold on a minute, I need this job, so I'm going to have to do what I'm told. And that might be easy as a child, but as a 30, 40 or 50-year-old man who's got any level of pride, being told what to do and what to wear, or you can't do this and that, isn't something that most of us want to be part of. So for me, with a lot of the men, interestingly, some kind of side hustle, let's use that as a term. And if you don't mind, I'll give you a great example of, with the network which we launched, one of the guys, I'm big on starting simple, but starting with something and taking some steps. And he jumped on the we have like twice monthly Zoom calls, like mastermind calls and accountability tools and stuff. And he said, I've been thinking about, in short, writing an ebook which he could then produce on sale and make some money from it. And basically, long story short, he hadn't. But for me, I was like, right, one night a week. Give me one night a week where you say to the wife, listen, after the kids gone to bed or whatever, I'm in the spare room or in my office, I'm working on it. Please don't ask me to help you, don't whatever. I'm doing this for you and the family and me. So within 3 weeks, he's now written the book that he's taken him a long time to, sent me through. And the point is, it's not about the ebook, it's about the accomplishment of realizing what's possible. Now we can use AI I literally have the tool to just put drop that ebook in, and it will create it in an instant. And if he wants to, he could then sell it for a no sale, no fee on Gumroad or somewhere, and start making money if it's any good. Or he could use it to become a key person of influence in his sector. We all know, if you say, here's Jeff and he's a lawyer, on here's Brian, his twin brother, but he produces a monthly newsletter and has written 2 books. Like it or not, people are like, oh, this guy must be better. He can probably charge more because he's published content. So for me, it's about, he's an example of that guy that it's not rocket science, but he could have done those things for years, but he hasn't. But now he's got the accountability, the clarity, the focus, and the kick up the arse. He's now produced something that he can now kind of generate something else from.
I think, would you say a lot of the men, and on that kind of theme, a lot of the men that are interested in what you're offering, are they looking to, I suppose, jack in the 9-to-5 grind, and they're looking for that freedom, I suppose, or they're looking for something that's a bit more fulfilling? Is that the majority of the men that you're meeting, or is there other motivators, I suppose?
It's a good question. There's a mix. You've got some guys that have got a business and are financially comfortable, that are basically saying, I'm just bored. So money's not an issue. Money's not the burning issue, as it were, but they all wouldn't mind more money, especially now. We said with interest rates, I know people now that had a big house and a medium-sized mortgage and maybe $1,500 left over each month, which is always nice. And now that's gone because the mortgages, they've just remortgaged at 6% instead of what they did at whatever it was. Suddenly you're like, oh, like I was comfortable, and now you start thinking, do I downgrade my car? So a lot of the men not necessarily want to leave their job, but would like some kind of side hustle / side income. And also I think it's important, it has to be digital, really, because you can't scale the rest of it, because it takes you can't get a part-time job, because yes, if you're desperate for money, that's going to be helpful, but you're going to get, the amount of money you're going to get is by the amount of hours. But trading time for money is something that a lot of men, and I did it for years, so don't get me wrong, and I work very long hours now, but I love what I do, if that makes sense. But I don't think there's ever been a more important time to be financially independent, and also an easier time in the fact that you can use AI for so much stuff now.
And I think linked to that, redundancy, you touched on it. AI could replace jobs. And I know you wanted to circle back to redundancy. I was made redundant from the FA in 2020 during COVID. Massively destroyed a career that I'd worked for and I was really passionate about and wanted to make a difference. Couldn't get back in because it was quite a niche role that you can't find out elsewhere. So what sort of stories do you hear around redundancy and the impact of that? Because I honestly believe that whole time was the contributing factor to my health condition starting. And I don't know if that's something you've heard as well, or redundancy. What was the thing that you wanted to circle back on that?
Yeah, it's a huge topic, because if you've never faced redundancy, I think the older you get, the harder it is, because like it or not, men that are, let's say, in their late 40s, 50s, unless you've got a big fat pot of money in the bank account, to suddenly go to another job that pays you what you're earning, if you're earning good money, to maintain the lifestyle of what like it is, the wife, the house, the car, the watch, the holidays, all that kind of stuff. And I kind of segment it, but I know, so I've been made redundant twice. I was very lucky. First time, I kid you not, I got made redundant. The entire trading desk did. So I worked for ABB. We were making good money as a trading desk. There was maybe 16 traders, but basically, let's call it the parent company, in short, bought another a small company, but also took on all their liability for a asbestos claim. And the asbestos claim, I think they thought, I don't know much about it because I was young and funny, but I think they thought it was going to be like millions, and it went to like $1 billion, just something colossal. And they just said, which wasn't very clever, but we're going to cut all risk trading. So we're going to cut anything that's risky, because if you can make money on that, you could lose money. And a great example, our colleagues that were, I think, in Zurich, can't remember, wherever, but I think there was 4 traders there and made like 20 million that year already between them. They were the first ones to get cut. So they made the entire desk, everything got made redundant. And I was in trouble then, because I hadn't been in that role to build up some connections and a network to go and look for another job. And it was the day, people will love this, the day that I literally exchanged contracts on my first flat with my then girlfriend, was the day we got called in, and they played a video from like whatever the guy was out in fucking Zurich or something, saying, oh really, he's probably a multi-millionaire. We're really sorry, but basically you're all out of a job.
Yeah.
And I phoned her, and I literally remember being like, hey, she's like, why are you phoning me? It's like 11 in the morning. I was like, yeah, been made redundant. And she's like, what the fuck are we going to do now? And I was like, I've no idea.
Yeah.
Because I don't know. Anyway, I was very lucky. We all got a really good payoff.
Yeah.
So, and they found me, a few of us went to another job. So, but honestly, if I hadn't have had that, I don't know, I had nothing else, if that makes sense. Now, fast forward to when I got made redundant the second time, I wanted to be made redundant. The company were brilliant. They'd found me other roles, but we were just like, do you know what? This is the right time. I got offered 1 or 2 roles, but I knew I didn't want to go. So that for me was like, I celebrated going. But I know guys that have been made redundant, it's a complete shock. They can't get another job doing what they're doing, or if they can, they've got to wait 6 months, or because you have gardening leave. And it can be really hard, because suddenly you've got no purpose. And I've said before, when I write about redundancy on LinkedIn, I don't want sob stories of redundancy. I want actionable things of how people navigated it. But it gets a lot of reaction and interaction, because I remember the second time I got made redundant, I'd walk Emma to the station, because she was still working at the same company. She'd get the 6 o'clock train in the morning. So I'd walk her to the station, and I'd probably have my tracksuit on. And I'd walk back past all the men, and a few women, but mostly men coming this way, who are always suited and booted like I was. And really weird, because I was like, when I walked in the door, I'd shut the door and it's 6:10 and it's pitch black. And I'm like, what do I do now? Because I had nothing to do, no structure, money in the bank. And it was like I'd never experienced that in 20 years. So redundancy, I think, is the sooner you can know that you're being redundant, the better, because you need to be prepared for it, basically.
Do you think, I suppose, in that vein, do you think you've always, I don't know, this is probably me speaking my view rather than asking the question. Do you always have to have a sense of paranoia? I don't mean extreme paranoia. Like, obviously, we've talked about some other things where there's, but do you mean, you've always got to kind of work on that basis? And I suppose I've seen this probably in the last year or so with my wife, not so much with my wife, but with other new mums that she met through like baby groups and stuff like that. It's not a case of them being made redundant, but what they find is when they go through the process of going on maternity leave and stuff like that, the penny drops that those companies they work for don't give a fuck about them. And literally, they literally will, the goalposts move, everything under the sun changes. And I know from speaking to people before and kind of when they're during maternity leave, the whole view of their, I suppose their employer or their whole working environment they had before just changes dramatically. And I suppose the blanket cover for that is all things change when you have a child, but it's not the child, it's the company. You then the penny drops. They don't really care. Like, that's the thing. And that goes back to the redundancy thing. It's all interlinked, isn't it? They couldn't give a
heard
top.
Men say, I never thought they'd get rid of me. And I'll shorten it. I thought I was too valuable for them to get rid of.
Yeah.
And then they find they were like the first one to go because actually they were on the biggest salary. And I know it comes down to performance, but sometimes it's like, do you know what? Let's trim the top few and try and build the other ones up. But I have a saying, which is there's no friends at work, only colleagues.
Yeah.
And even my partner Emma, I know she made the mistake when she left the city. And there's one or two people she'd be like, oh, we're such great friends and we'll stay in touch. And I was like, you'll never fucking hear from them again. Or you might once or twice, but then that will be it. And I get it. It's like when you leave, you're completely out of that. You're out of the game, basically. And that's why when people get made redundant, if you've got something to go to, you can be relaxed. And I spoke to someone recently a man who got made redundant quite a few months ago. And the mistake you can make is, I've got ages to look for another job because you got a payoff. So the first 2 months you can be like, I just chill, do some painting at home, or, just maybe go on a holiday, whatever. But then you come back and try and get in the game and realize that people forget about you. Not always, but, or they filled the positions. And then suddenly 3 months in, your wife's like, what's going on? And you're like, haven't got any interviews. The egg timer of money is slow. The sand's dripping away. And the more that goes away, unless you've got a load of cash in the bank, and even then you're like, I've got a lot going out and not much coming in. And then you become desperate, and then you're not in a position of strength to turn down that job you don't want. You end up taking something you need, and you're back in the same fucking position that you were to start with.
Yeah, huge. I mean, because I actually sold my house. We moved to Spain. We bought a place out there, and then our little lad didn't, settle, so we come back. And then the world back here has changed so much, and the prices of everything went through the roof. And you think, oh right, we got to start from scratch again. We got to look at different things. But then the positives can start to come out of it, like you say. You start to shift your mindset, and you go, I've got to find solutions around this because I'm not going to find the job, especially in the world where I was in football. It's changed very much to certain demographics being prioritized over the roles that they want to offer people. And if you are a white middle-aged man, unfortunately, you won't fill that brief. And I think, it comes back to that's the reality of the world in a lot of places. And it's trying to go, well, okay, they're the chips that have been stacked against me. How do I find a solution? Is that another common thing that you're hearing of, that people are facing this demographic sort of issue that is now feeling like, well, why are we being persecuted at the moment? It doesn't make sense.
Yeah. And it's funny because the people that have pushed those rules are white men. Fun enough, who are at the very top, let's call it the globalists, as it were. But all it also does is it creates division. And what I would say is people like themselves. We gravitate towards people that are like us. And if you then, great example, we're in a little sleepy Cotswolds village, but if you create, and I know people, there's a big push for diversity and let's be inclusive and diverse and bring as many people in as different as possible. But you look, even at schools, you'll often have the different groups of ethnicities that all stick together. And you probably find that their families all stick together as well, because people like themselves. Why is it that Birmingham, when you go to Birmingham, you feel completely outsider if you're white? Nothing wrong with that. But you realize because people gravitate towards their own customs and values and, family kind of, family values as much as everything else. So it's funny. I look at with the Whole Man Academy, when I talk privately to a lot of men, they say exactly the kind of stuff you say. But the sad thing is they say, I can't voice those opinions in the outside world because there's always someone waiting around the corner to be offended. Yeah.
And I think with offense, it is that person's problem. And it takes confidence, doesn't it, to say, but that's your you problem. That's not a me problem.
Yeah.
I'm not deliberately going out to offend you by living the way that I live. But I think this whole offense agenda and how people feel entitled to be able to say, well, because I'm offended, it means I'm more important. You know, just a daft one on this that you might find interesting. My son's doing home economics the other day, making a pizza. He wanted to put cheese and ham on it. We gave him some to take into school. The teacher said, you can't use that because it's not vegan ham. And it's like, but why does the vegan in the class, if there is even one, get the dictatorial approach to go, because I'm vegan, and what is it, cross-contamination, you know? What the hell? But you think, where does that come from? Where does that nonsense come from? Where someone said it's more important that we have that vegan ham. I mean, like, have you had vegan cheese on a pizza? It's bloody disgusting. You don't want to eat it. So why would I want to eat vegan ham? He's bringing something home that was supposed to be going, well done, that tastes lovely, bud, good job. And instead, he's told that he can't there, and it needs to be stay in his bag. So the dog was pleased, you know what I mean? It got to have a bit of ham, but all that nonsense where you just go, really? And I don't know how it seeps in. Where did it start to seep in? Where did these people start to get their sort of claws into it? Because you think, do they go to training cinemas or something where they got to go actually?
Look at let me use a great example. I mean, there's good rabbit holes you go there. I mean, I'll just drop this one in that we know. Again, I have nephews at one of the top boys' schools, so I'm privy to exactly what's going on all the time. I mean, they had a campaign saying banter is bullying.
Right. Yeah.
Now, you guys know, in football, in finance, in whatever, that banter is a important part of the male, the male world. And you or I, if we could take the piss out of each other, I love you guys, and I'm just saying it because it's funny. But if you're like, he said I've got a big nose, or I don't like my pink shirt, or look at his silly beard, or something like that, you're like, listen, if you think that you're going to go out in the world and not have anything said to you that you find offended by, you're fucked. Or you will end up, you will be a total pathetic snowflake that people won't want to hang around with. Or some people will, and they'll be sad as well. So the school system, like you said, is fucked on many levels. But when you realise, I mean, the boys had things where they were told, there's too much masculinity in the room, or so too much testosterone in the room. And you say, hold on a minute. If girls were doing girl things, would you go in and say there's too much femininity in the room?
Exactly.
How would that work? They've had talks on white privilege. They've had to listen to that stuff. Like you say, where does it come from? That's another hour-long podcast. But we bring it back to men, and I think men find that as well. A lot of them tiptoe around on like LinkedIn, and I get it because they're like, I think this or this is bollocks, but I can't say it because I have bills to pay. And you're like, it's scary, isn't it? Really?
Do you think, though? I suppose, and it goes back to what we were saying originally, where you were saying about schools being, the production line of worker bees and stuff like that. If we were to kind of change the mentality, and I suppose you also said as well, you do need people that are going to do the 9 to 5 and things get done, I suppose. But do you think, I don't know, like, do we reimagine what the development of a young person becomes so that, I don't know, we churn out not just the worker bees, we churn out people that their natural they're not being pulled towards, the sensible, good job type approach. They're actually going out there and doing something like a risk taker or, setting something up, things like that. Like, I don't know. Do you think we can actually reverse that or change that? Because I don't think we can in this country.
I'd like to say yes. I think the school system is completely and utterly entrenched in a certain ideology at the moment, if that makes sense. And so I look at it that, can I affect that? No. Are my kids at school? No. Therefore, is my time better spent helping let's call it the middle-aged men, if that makes sense?
Yeah.
That's where, when I say my expertise, that's my thin slice of expertise. But it still doesn't mean, and it's good for us to talk about it, because sometimes you'll get messages from people saying, I'm really glad you said this about this, because I've been feeling like that, but I just haven't, I haven't heard anybody else. I thought it was just me, if that makes sense.
But do you think as well, like this is an issue I've seen time and time again in this country, and I'm not saying it's just unique to this country, but especially where, so say like some of the men you're working with, you're encouraging them to kind of, I suppose, take responsibility in some ways for their life.
Yeah.
One of those ways is obviously setting up their own business, stuff like that. But I've done numerous businesses and things like in this country.
It's really hard.
Yeah, it's hard. But the other bit as well is, as I suppose it comes with the hard with it, people take great joy in firstly telling you how hard it is, but then they also tell you like how bad the idea is. They literally tell you why you shouldn't be doing this. Do you know what I mean? They build so many hurdles, or just things. But then I've spent time in like the US and other places, and the mentality is like the polar opposite. Where if you said, "Oh yeah, I just started my business," everyone's like, "Great, that sounds excellent. Like, what is it?" And it's like no one says, "Oh, that's a pile of shit." It's just kind of like what we have in this country. I don't know how you get rid of that mentality.
You're right. I think it's an age-old thing, and maybe when I was younger, I might have been the same. I mean, I'm a very different man to what I was. I'm 45 now, so let's say at 35, around that time, I think I woke up to, I was a different man around that time. But you're right. I found that where, although I didn't start it off as a business, I've spoke to a lot of people that have, who said in this country, it just felt, it's like personal development over here. It's very guarded and it's very, there's not much of it about, which is why I saw it as, I know there's a desire for it. I want to create what I wanted as a 35-6-year-old man that I would have spent good money on, and fuck everybody else. Like, I want to bring in the men that was like I was. But yeah, you go to the States, and hence why personal development is massive over there, because they have a more, for want of a better term, a can-do attitude.
Yeah.
It's not, what are you doing that for? It's like, great, tell me about it. And I'm trying to think who it was I heard who said, who'd lived in the States and over here. And long story short, like in the States, if he drove around in like his Ferrari, people would come up and be like, wow, what do you do to earn this? He's amazing. Over here, it'd be like, wanker, you flat.
Yeah, there is
like,
that. Yeah.
Sorry, what? So,
yeah.
And I think on that as well, I see it from a selfish perspective where I look at my son and go, well, look, if a lot of the other children are lemons, because that's the way they're being developed, you've got a great advantage, son. And also you're not competing with the kids in your local area. If you want to be successful, there's other kids whose other parents are pushing the agenda to help them become the best that they can be. So focus on that. Don't worry about the lemons too much, because unfortunately they're almost like the lemmings. They're gone. They're already in that mindset. So especially post-COVID, I've found a lot of children have become more, smaller in their character, their personality in certain places, because they haven't coped with that whole narrative quite well. And I think actually they do feel a little bit like they're behind the curve, because they didn't have someone, like you said, who was a parent who was trying to just get them to go, don't worry about that, work forward, try to do other things, because that's a part of what your life could be. But there's other elements where you can design what that looks like, and trying to have that with your own child is fascinating.
You think, and I think it's a really important point, going back to what is so funny, how some people think like, oh, we should just forgive and forget what happened in the last 3 years. And you go, no. Think about the youngsters. We're all older now. I know you said old, but let's be fine to say old.
Yeah.
Who missed out on, if you're at university, getting pissed, shagging people, having parties, learning, doing all-nighters, doing all this stuff, and meeting new people who were working or studying from home. Then you look at these school children who, no matter who they were should be out in the playground having fun and running around and learning from each other and doing all this great stuff, sitting, looking at a laptop with no friends around them. And then you take it younger to the babies. Our middle child didn't get to go to all the little classes where all the babies, dribbled on each other and poked each other in the eye and rolled around on the floor. Everything was shut. So whilst they did that, they were taken out to supermarkets where people were all like this. And what a dystopian fucking nightmare. So the long reaching issues that I think that probably maybe never will be fully understood from all of that cannot be underestimated. But if you want to flip it then to the men, a lot of the men that I spoke to said working from home was good for a little while, and then they realized they suddenly became lonely. Not everybody, don't get me wrong, but often it was either the men that were on their own that suddenly became lonely and depressed, because you were just, isolation is the biggest punishment in prison. So we all like a little bit of time on our own, but yours no, continuous for most people does you in. Because what some men said was, even if they used to work from home, they'd go out to the pub that night, or a nightclub, or a restaurant, or on dates, or what have you. So you had that double whammy. Then you had the dads who had kids, like I did, who suddenly they've got a high pressure job, they're working long hours, and they've got the fucking kids, rightly so, screaming in the background, because kids shouldn't be quiet.
Yeah.
You wouldn't take a child into your office, and when they were noisy, be like, shut up, because you'd be like, don't bring them in the office, you idiot.
Yeah.
So, I spoke to, and it was really hard sometimes to hear from men who have had a lot of pride and a high-powered job and blah, blah, blah. And they were like, I'm finding this really hard because I'm snapping at the kids, saying, like, shut up, I'm trying to work. I want a Zoom call. And the kids are like, I'm at home. What do you want me to do? And then the wife starts arguing and saying, don't have a go at the kids. Great example, a guy who I did a little bit of coaching with, let's say, and he said, I've never felt depressed before. But, within a few months of working from home, I suddenly just felt like I didn't want to get out of bed and had all these different feelings. When things started back up, the company said, hey, you can come back to work. We're opening the office up. But some people didn't want to go back to the office. Up to them, fair enough, for various reasons. And then he found that it was only going in 1 day a week. So he said, the problem is I was going in, there's no one in the office. So I might as well just stayed at home. And then in the end, the company said, hey, there's no one in the office. Let's just shut the office and we'll all work permanently from home. And he's had to leave because I can't do it. And that for me had never come up before for most people, but for men especially, it was very hard to separate the blurred lines of being dad at home and dad in the office who's got deadlines.
Yeah, because I think there is almost a narrative pushing people towards this: be isolated, be at home. Like I said, I deliver mental health and well-being training, and I think they want people to be unwell again. And that is the cynical side of me where I'm going, it is big pharma. The more people that are unwell and depressed and on antidepressants,
more customers.
There's more customers. And, that's why it's great for me that you're pushing the methodology of, look, how well are you looking after yourself? What's your routines? Are you hydrating, eating, sleeping, exercising, being social? What does that look like for you? Are you setting yourself realistic objectives and goals to try and achieve? Do you have purpose? Because if you don't have any of that, then, it's very easy to slip into, I feel awful, because you've lost your direction and goals. And with that in mind, then, the Wellman Academy, Whole Man Academy, where are you going with that? So I saw bits on there where you're really trying to help people, and I know that's not the only thing you're doing, but from that perspective, is that something that a lot of guys are reaching out for? Or is it part of what you just give them as part of the whole package?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's evolved because, as I say, like all of us, you sometimes never know the path ahead and who you meet and where it takes you. What I realized was being around more men who are, especially in the States, who have got massive memberships. Firstly, let's be honest, the most important thing for me is me making money, because I've got to pay. But what I mean is, if you can do good with that money and put more events on and create better content and etc., that's where you can amplify it. And that was my mistake before. I should have started a membership a couple of years ago, because what guys said was, listen, I've listened to a podcast, I've read your journal, I've worked through your online course, but on a Monday morning, it's still just me. And we heard that from guys, even at personal development events I went to. They'd say, listen, the problem is you get all excited at the weekend and you go home and, emotionally vomit all over your wife, how great you're going to do all these things. And by Wednesday, you're like, what the fuck was I doing? So for me, trying to add in the regular accountability and focus and clarity of a unit was important. So I would say my main goal is to grow the network. And I don't know what the tipping point is, but at some point I would need another person, another man to help me. And I have 2 people in mind. once it becomes financially viable. But I try and look at it as a 2-pronged or 3 or 4-pronged approach, as a funnel. Let's say I know that everybody's either got their own budget or their willingness to spend what they have got. So I say, look, you start off with free content. You can read the journal, and that's free. Mondays and Fridays and the odd bonus one. You can listen to 130 hours of podcasts for free. You can take the quiz for free. That would already help you. But then if you want to go a step further, the next one is something like our energy, what it was called our energy protocols. We're refreshing it for next year. But we had over 100 men bought the course, which again, for some people might not sound a lot, but I was like, put 100 men together and realize they're all working through your 6-part course on nutrition, mindset, resilience, morning routine, fitness. So they could then buy that for, let's say, less than $97 or something like that. Or they could now join the network for, well, the price had just gone up, but for it will be $67, which let's say faces about 50 quid a week, 50 quid a month, which, is, for want of a better word, is probably the price of one coffee a day. And what that would afford you is being in a network of men who are driven to succeed, who are all normal guys, but you then get the accountability and the goal setting and the events and stuff like that, and the regular calls that just help you check in and drive you forward. But the other thing for me is, again, the events. So in November, I hosted 3 events, one in Winchester, one in London, one in the Cotswolds. I mean, the Cotswolds one, we had 14 men come to it. I actually got, which is random for men, but I got thank you cards sent through the door, which I've never had before. I've had bottles of drinks sent to me, but there was a big appetite for men who all want to do well and be a good dad and be a good business partner and provide and what have you, but who want sporadic events where you can get around other men who can have proper conversations and aren't going to be offended if you said something you don't like. And more importantly, maybe get out in nature, get around a fire, cook steaks, have a couple of talks, leave your phones alone. And I asked all of the guys there, and there's 14 around that table, or 13 and me, who would be interested in that next year. And it was like a Mexican wave. Everybody said yes, because I think a lot of men want to get away from tech. It's very useful, but get back to something of nature, even if it's for a weekend or something like that.
I think I'm a hypocrite in some respects, in that technology is a big part of my daily life, I suppose. But you're right, it's so difficult now to escape. I suppose the only situation I can think where in the last few years where I've escaped technology is actually if you ever have to get on a long haul flight. Even that's evaporating. If you fly British Airways, their Wi-Fi is terrible, but if you go like other airlines, you'll get Wi-Fi. But like fly BA, the chance you're getting good Wi-Fi on that is really hard. So I flew to the States last year, and it was pleasant because I could sit there, read a book, catch up on podcasts, obviously off my phone that was on. Thinking about it, but just do what you want. You're not being dictated by the phone or emails or anything, isn't it? It's just so rare in this world now.
The thing is, you become so dependent on it. I mean, I've got Instagram. I hate Twitter, so I check in and again. Instagram and LinkedIn, I'm on all the time, and I've got 3 different email addresses. And I use Telegram, WhatsApp, normal text messages. People message me on Instagram as well, and of course on LinkedIn. So I've got in the morning you could say check 5 or 6 things and messages before you even start. And sometimes it drives you mad because you start again because you'll be like, oh, I've looked at this, and then you go back to LinkedIn and then Instagram and then Facebook. I forgot that one because we have people message us on there, and before you know it, you're like, what was I doing? Why did I pick up the phone? So again, that's a big one. So many guys on podcasts are like, it kind of is an energy vampire, and time, it sucks your time when you realize you're fucking scrolling and you're like, oh, there's a cat dressed as Hitler. What am I doing about, why am I looking at this now? So it's a big one for a lot of men. And, we all know it's designed to be as addictive as possible.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing listening to you this evening, Anthony, and just that last bit, the thing that jumped straight to me, and I don't know if it's something you've considered, is the franchise approach. You could almost see the whole Man Academy being rolled out. So you've almost got these these secular clubs which feed into the larger club.
Yeah.
But you think, well, actually, if you did find these guys with a similar mindset around, we want to create these more local hubs, you know, is that something you've considered? You know, because it does sound like there's lots of men, like I think, who would be keen to attend these events, get to know each other, build their networks and connections, and have that focus. Is that something for the future?
And what I like there, Simon, is it's a big thinking approach, isn't it? I always call like the Whole Man Academy like a little big idea. Like it was a little idea I had that has grown to. I'll tell you what was cool. Same with podcasts. I had a guy contact me a few years ago, and the great thing about podcasts or content online is, of course, it can be found at any point. So they could be, listening to it a year later, 2 years later. But one guy was like a police officer from Toronto. And I was like, hey, great that he's like, the guys in the whatever listen to your podcast and read your journal, like, the police officers there. And for him, he was like, there's nothing like this in Canada. And, I was at an event a long time ago where I got talked to someone who came over and said, oh, this is cool. My husband runs or is part of one of the American football teams. And he's into this stuff, would be really interested in you maybe coming out there and doing some kind of something. Now, nothing came of it because, to be honest, I think we were about to have our second baby. So I was, had priorities. But it's certainly something that for me, the big thing is about how can you have more impact? So you start with what you can and then you build out from there. But you said the key thing is finding men who are awake to how the world works. Because I find it very hard to be around people that don't, because then I can't have someone with my rubber stamp of approval, who like watches the news and thinks it's real, like watches the BBC and everything that comes on. They're like, oh yeah, this is how I can't have that, because in the end you just go like that. So I've connected with so many more men who I say have got a brain. And what I realized was the cleverest people I knew in the last few years are now I realize were the most brainwashed.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, so they followed that narrative of this is what educated people look like, sound like, and it's that charade, that sort of presentation of self. A lot of work by Goffman around how do we present to the world what we want people to see, and the fear of actually I don't want to be undereducated because then I'll get persecuted. But like you say, well, actually, none of us stop evolving, developing, growing. So we're always just adding extra elements to ourselves. Like you said, 35-year-old you to 45 you is a different person. And I think we've probably all been through that, and having children shapes you and changes you, and how life gives you a kick in along the way and how you bounce back for that. I think we'll all, contribute to that. So no, that's interesting because, that franchise approach, me and a friend were just talking about it the other day, because I've got a friend who runs these after school clubs, football clubs, and he's got a franchise in that. And you think, well, actually, that type of approach for this sounds like there could be something there. And I just wanted to ask you if it's something you considered. And because I think, I'd be interested in the future, because I think it feeds into that sort of, you want these conversations, you want people empowering, supporting each other. And, where it grows and develops from, you don't know, but it could be an interesting element to how you go in the future. So
I think football is a good example of, men want to belong to something, go to something, and, also be entertained sometimes. And, when you look around the country at the thousands and thousands of hundreds of thousands of men that go to football and rugby, let's just pick those. That when, they're the kind of men I'm trying to reach. Because I'm a normal guy with normal dreams and desires and goals and kids and, late nights, and I've fucked things up in the past and I've done stupid shit and I'm not perfect. So I want to get around those guys. I always say it's an attitude and intentions. I don't care what you've got, what you drive, what your job is, what your salary is, what your house looks like. Have you got a good attitude, and have you got intentions to do some good stuff in the world for you first and your family, and then your wider community? But I'd love to talk about football if you have time for a minute, because I love a great example of, again, going back to the COVID stuff, but the psychology of what happened there can be studied for many, many years to come. And this is where it's interesting, because if you remember, a lot of people did whatever they were told, okay, for argument's sake, and we know that was a fear-based tool that was used. But what was really interesting was that I feel they gave football back because at some point there'll be some unrest, if that makes sense. And it's the bread and circus of, okay, look, give them their football, right? Don't let them go to stadiums. But now suddenly on a Saturday and a Sunday and whatever, a lot of, fighting age men, if you want to put, will happily sit and get excited about men they've never met who are fitter than them and richer than them and probably have more sex than them.
Yeah.
But what happened was when they those men were never going to go out and protest against having their freedom taken away because they've now got what they needed to be fed, if that makes sense. But when they then announced that the Europeans, I think the Super League was going to start, when it was going to be Liverpool, Chelsea, Man City, and what have you, you saw thousands of men take to the streets and be at their clubs saying, no, no, no. You haven't gone to, and I'm a football lover, so I'm not beating on football fans here. I've been a Liverpool fan since I was tiny.
Yeah.
But they've been had in the fact that football is more important to them than their freedom, because they would take their masks off and go and chant with their mates and go, and take their shirts off. But back on a Monday morning, they were back on the tube with a mask on, doing what they're told, and only seeing their nan, through a fucking care home window. So it's a very interesting one to look at. If you give a lot of men who haven't got, men need excitement in their life and thrill, and if you give it to them via the medium of entertainment on TV, they, on a Monday morning, they're happy to go into work because they're like, I had my hit of dopamine at the weekend. And if it's not their dopamine, if that makes sense, it's been generated by other men. So it's a really interesting one.
Yeah, because I grew up with loads of lads. I'm from Portsmouth originally, and all my mates' brothers were football hooligans. And that's how they found their release. They had the mundanity of their role, their job, and that excitement that's how they presented that to the world at that time, because that was the sort of era, mid 70s to mid 80s, before the rave scene come in and everyone started getting loaded up and hugging each other. But that was part of how you displayed, your desire or frustrations, and I think that's where that is a release for men, is that sporting element.
Outlet.
Yeah. And men, I do assessments for professional football scholars in clubs still as part of one of my roles. And those young people don't have much of an opportunity to think, so they're indoctrinated in a lot of way and controlled. And if we look at the statistics, less than 1% make it to the elite end of the game. But one other part on this is, look at us three. We don't live in the area that we grew up.
Yeah.
So I found where I live now, I moved out here as part of, we wanted to live by the coast. But when I lost my job, it changed. All of a sudden, I'm like, I live out here, but there's no football where I am. It's a desolate wasteland. Gillingham's not much of a team, to be fair. So there's lots of men who've been displaced and moved to areas where their childhood friends are not there anymore. So these type of clubs, I don't know if I call it a club or a network, where you can go, actually, I want to go and have a chat with guys. Because my fallback was always play sport, go and play football, pick up squash, do that. But now, because I've become unwell and got less energy, I can't do that. And you lose that. And you think, well, actually, if there was something where I could go and connect with these guys who are in it for the same reason, they just want to socialize with some men, chill out, almost like a gentleman's club in a way. But it is that sort of approach. I think, it's something that men are definitely calling out for. I would say, and it links to these, well-being things that are popping up. Where, I know a local charity called Head in the Game, where men go down, play five-a-side, talk about well-being and stuff, have a kick about, then go home. You just think that there's all these different tiers, but to bring that together would be really, really powerful, I think.
So, and it's really important you said this, and this is one of these points about, let's talk mental health. My issue is that mental health is part of what makes up a man, as we know. And I've said on podcasts, you can have someone that's like, mentally, I'm fine, but I'm fucking broke. Like, I don't need mental health support. I need strategies to help my business. I need marketing. My mental health is fine, but I'm fat and out of shape, and I need someone to help me with that. So when I first started, people wrongly assumed that it was all about mental health, and we know it has its place. And for me, my example was, let's say with the Whole Man Academy, mine is about aspirational events and personal development, looking to the future, like looking at where you are now into the future, not necessarily to the past. Because if you go over the past, you're just picking a scab that's never going to heal. Not to say there's no value in looking at what's happened before, but some people revel in, let's just talk about what happened before. But I would say, let's say on the broking floor when I was there, and there was, let's just say number 300 men. If I'd have gone like, hey guys, who wants to come to a mental health event for men this week?
Yeah.
A shoe or a Daily Mail. Fuck off. If you just said, hey guys, look, there's a mental strength and resilience event this weekend. We've got special forces guys, ex-footballers, CEOs and Maori warriors from New Zealand coming in online. Who's interested? Suddenly, it's just roughly the same thing, but packaged in a different way.
Yeah.
And that's, a mistake maybe I made to say, but I always knew I didn't want it to be just mental health, because the problem is I'm trying to attract men in the gap. And the gap is, you've got depressed and suicidal. You've got the gap of like, is this it? I want to be better, or things are going well, I can do more. And then the people at the top who are like, I don't need any help at all. But you don't want to. A charity is the right place for suicidal, deep depression.
Yeah.
And harsh as it is, do you want your entire customer base to be built around that? I'll give you a clue. Yeah. So for me, I was tried to be very clear about, I'm taking the man I didn't have mental health issues. I was fucking bored of my job. I had money in the bank. I was very fit and healthy. I just represented the country in the World Championships in America for obstacle course racing. I, had a loving family. So I had all those boxes ticked. I was very strong mentally, but I was like, I need something else in life. So it's an important one to say there's a time and a place for the mental health stuff, but you have to be careful that talking about mental health puts some men off from being like, I don't want to go to that.
Yeah.
Because then people say it's a safe space. Now, no man has ever said, unless it's joking, I'm looking for some kind of safe space to have a chat. It doesn't work like that. But people think it does because it's like a buzzword. So people, and I don't beat on people for that, because I'm like, listen, it explains what things are, but I try and talk the language of, for other men, they're not looking for a safe space. That sounds like the rest of the world is dangerous and they need a padded cell. For me, it's like, you need to sit down with someone in the corner of a nice hotel or on Zoom or whatever and get out what the fuck's going on. What's your silent struggle and what can we do about it?
Yeah, it's that mental fitness. It's that mental fitness element of, this is how I cope with the world. And it's different for different things. Like you say, it's not, I'm unwell. It is, I just am not challenged, or I need something else. So, I think terminology is quite powerful, because when I deliver courses, I say it's much easier to talk about stress than it is mental illness and mental health. Because exactly like you said, people get turned off by going, oh, I don't want to be labeled as that. And it's like, right, okay, there's no problem. But stress, such an easier conversation to have with people who are not managing it effectively. So no, that's a great point. Thanks, Anthony.
I think one thing that's worth asking at this point, you mentioned obviously about your program closed last night. I guarantee there'll be people listening to this that what you've said has resonated with them. And I suppose that first step is always the hardest step. What are you going to be opening up again for more people, or what can that next step be, I suppose, for listeners that saying that what you've talked about has resonated and they want to take that next step, I suppose. They've seen your content, but they actually want to, be part of something.
I always think it's about, and I'd never like the term following or followers, but for me, I'm the same. I have guys, I'd say I'm a follower because I like their attitude, if that makes sense. And we know that other people won't like my attitude and your attitude at all. But you're like, great, you go and do you. The other guys come and get around me and all the other men around. So the reason I closed it was I wanted, firstly, the men who'd been thinking about it to have a push to either, like you said, David, a deadline of not like, I'll join when I feel like it. It's like, do you want to, are you fucking in or not?
Yeah.
Stick your cock in the custard. It's not expensive. Everybody in there can afford it. Either shit or get off the pot, as it were. And you had some guys say, do you know what? I needed the kick up the arse to get involved. So it closed last night at midnight. So we had 2 more men that joined. Although one of them, to be fair, messaged me. He's been a long time supporter of the Whole Man Academy, and I'll link it to football in a minute. But he messaged me. He's like, "I've got so much stuff going on. Please, can you just I'm going to join, but can you just let me come back to you on Friday?" And we all know what that's like when you've got deadlines, kids, and everything. So we will reopen it in early 2024. But if people want to, the first thing to do is basically to either go to our website and just take the quiz, because everybody that's on our Whole Man Journal email list, and it's good quality content, there's no fucking rubbish on there, means that you'll firstly hear about it. But I'll tell you a cool story about the guy that joined yesterday. He came to he's been to Winchester dinners and several London dinners. And he used to be a ball boy at Reading Football Club when a professional footballer called Nicky Forster, who you might know, you might not.
Yeah.
Really nice guy. He's been to Whole Man Academy dinners, reads our journal. He's been to, I've had him on the podcast. And here's what's cool. Nicky came to one of our London events for dinner, and Ash was sitting next to him. And I didn't realize that Ash used to be the ball boy at Reading when Nicky was the striker. Was the centre forward, and used to, when I say worship him, you know what I mean? It really looked at him like a hero.
Yeah.
And for me, I was like, he's my mate. That's all I see him as, because that's the way I am. But for him, it was like, I'd never thought that I'd be sitting having a beer and a burger and just a good chat with who I, deemed as my hero all those years ago. And I was like, that's forgetting everything else. Isn't that cool? Yeah. I love that stuff. So that was a long way of answering your question, that it will reopen. The flight reopening in 2024, early in 2024, and I want it to be with no nonsense men who don't mind a little bit of real talk.
Yeah, and I think there's plenty out there that will reach out to that. Like I say, I mean, we're still trying to grow our listener base, but there will be people that have listened in, and again, from our network, who will go, that resonates, and it's something that I'm most definitely interested in. So the other element of this, you've put some great little sayings in throughout. We always say to people, is there one defining saying that you have that sort of drives where you've come from, that you live by, a statement or anything like that? Or do you just go, actually, they're okay, they're not things that I really buy into, I use them every now and then? So we always ask someone if they have got a quote that they live by, but some say yes, some say no, but we always like to just gather one if they have got one.
I definitely... one of my biggest bits after doing 130 podcasts, you can imagine, even if I had one thing from each guy, you've forgotten 100 of them, and you've still got 30 odd.
Yeah.
Before I give you my saying, which just reminds me where I'm going with it, one of the best bits of advice I got now this doesn't matter if you're male or female, you've got a partner or you've got a workforce, what have you. I interviewed a former Californian police detective who went on to become a men's coach, and he said to me, one thing especially relationships, but go to your partner, your husband, whoever it is, and say, and blow their mind by saying, how can I make your day a 10? And his point was, what you might think that they're going to ask and demand all these things, sometimes it'd be the simplest thing that they're just like, I just wish you'd empty the dishwasher. It sounds silly, but and just do this, or just something that for them is really important, that for you're quite kind of lax about it. And I know when I got off the call and went into my partner Emma and was like, how can I make your day a 10? I think she thought I'd been possessed by someone. I was like, where's Anthony? What have you done with him? But that can be applied. I've done that in Talk To. I said that can be applied to your workforce. Imagine saying to your team or your desk or something, guys, just a question, how could I make your day a 10, or your experience of working here, how could I make it a 10? And some people might be like, I just wish I could leave early on a Friday, an hour or two early.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things that you can apply to a lot of your life. But my final one is, it's my ending calling card, which is the world needs strong men.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of surrounds everything I try and do, because I'm trying to connect with more strong men. I'm trying to create more strong men. I'm trying to be stronger myself so I can bring up mentally and physically strong boys, as we've got 3 boys. And generally, you look around and the fucking shit show that we're in at the moment, with the clowns and the puppets and the cretins in government all around the world, so especially the 5 I countries, but all around the world, that no time like it, I think that we need strong men. And I don't know where we go from here, but the
Mhm.
more men like us that we can connect with, that at some point you might need, could be very, very valuable.
Yeah. Excellent. So 2 great ones there, Dave. They'll be
Yeah.
going on the t-shirts, mate, won't they?
Yeah.
So Anthony, it's been amazing.
It's been really
2
good,
hours has gone and flown
that,
by. Yeah. And covered a variety of topics. And when we get guests like yourself on, actually, we think we've still only scratched the surface.
Yeah.
We really haven't really got depth to what we're doing, because it's hard to in these sort of conversations. So it would be great to check back in with you in the future if you'd be up for that.
Absolutely.
I'm definitely interested in learning more about the network when it reopens, and getting involved. And I'll be in touch around that and seeing what it looks like. So thank you for coming on and sharing, what you're trying to achieve, and the groups you're trying to formulate, because I think there is that desire from men, like you said, to just communicate, collaborate, get together, and just be men, just be seen in a place where it's encouraged, and it's really an opportunity to thrive. So thank you for giving up your time and coming on. It's been really great 2 hours to have a chat with you.
It's been a pleasure. You're more than welcome to come and join the Brotherhood, brothers.
Yeah.
I'll be having. I tell you one thing that I can say safely from this conversation is it's so good to get someone speaking positively. Do you know what I mean? In that, you just, as you said, like, you pick up a newspaper, the news. There's so much negativity out there. I know we've talked about some. I don't really call it negativity, but we've talked about things that happen. But you come across so well in terms of the positivity, and you're not looking to say, oh, well, this is what's happened. You're looking for actually how to move things forward. So as I said, I think this will resonate with a lot of our listeners. And I'll be joining them, having a look at when things do reopen in the new year. So thanks again for coming on. And as Simon says, it'd be good to catch up, hopefully in the new year, and find out how things are going.
I'll happily. I'm pleased to say that I often get asked back, only because I will give a unfiltered view of things, and maybe it's rare. So I would say, even this time has gone so quickly, and I think that's a very good indication if you're having a good conversation with people you really resonate and like. Instead of sitting there being like, "Fucking hell, this is only 20 minutes in." So I'm.
That's normally what it's like, if I'm honest.
And if you want me to come back on, I will happily go for it.
Brilliant. Excellent. Right. Well, thank you, Anthony, and all the best. Enjoy your Christmas.
Cheers, guys, and you.
Cheers.